1965. Houston police officers responded to a welfare check at a home in Thesidy's neighborhood of Montrose. The elderly couple who had lived there for years hadn't been seen or heard from in a few days, and so the authorities headed on over to the modest yellow brick house, not really expecting anything out of the ordinary. However, what they walked into would become nothing short of one of the most disturbing crime scenes ever in American. Music, applause, history. Hey guys, it's Andrew, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Every 10. Well, today we're turning back the clock a little bit, but for good reason, because this case isn't just another unsolved mystery. It's a crime that was ruthless and is shrouded in secrecy, post-government cover-ups, and one very smart and diabolical son. So let's head on down to Houston and check out the case of these books murders. Well, tonight's case from The Text Files is a bizarre murder mystery, one filled with intrigue, allegations of CIA connection. Some even have tried to tie it to the Kennedy assassination. It's the case of the Ice Books murders. In order to really grasp how someone like Charles Rogers could possibly commit such a gruesome crime and then disappear without a trace, you need to understand who he was. At his core, his father and one of the victims, Fred, was born on January 19th of 1884. In the aftermath of America's Gilded Age, by the time he reached adulthood, he'd established himself as a real estate salesman in Houston, Texas. However, underneath that cover of respectability, there was also a man dabbled in some not-so-legal things, and back then, Texas was still kind of the Wild West, so it makes sense. And Fred worked as a bookie, as a side hustle, regularly engaging in illegal gambling operations and various insurance fraud schemes, and those who knew them would later describe Fred as a devious con artist man who had a talent for manipulating both strangers and family members alike. Music. On October 8th of 1892, Uwena Ivor was born, and she would later become Mrs. Rogers. But like her future husband, she wasn't quite what she appeared to be on the surface. While she maintained the appearance of a well-maintained, improper Houston housewife, Uwena was reportedly just as cunning as Fred when it came to financial manipulation, and scheming together they would create a household that appeared normal enough, but truly harbored some deep dysfunction within place, where family members didn't interact with one another in a loving and nurturing way. And this was the environment that Charles was born and raised. Music. In Fred and Edua settled into Houston's Montrose neighborhood. They would purchase the house at 1815 Driscoll Street. That's where they would spend decades of their lives until the very violent end as they got older. I'm talking in their 70s and 80s. FR could often be seen culling old newspapers from the neighbor trash cans, and supposedly he did this to sell them for a little bit of extra cash. So even in his old age, he was always doing some sort of hustle to make some extra money. Edua maintained a quiet presence, keeping mostly to herself inside the home, but remained cordial with those in the neighborhood that she saw their lifestyle habits may have seemed a bit odd, especially for former real estate salesmen like Fred, but ultimately nothing they did raised any serious alarms. They were just another quiet retired couple getting on through music life. When their son Charles was born in 1921, right from the beginning it was clear that he was a bit different from the other children, and not in a bad way. He was quite brilliant, showing exceptional intelligence from an early age, but also withdrawn socially. While most of the neighborhood kids were playing outside, he chose to remain in his room, reading and studying, just keeping to himself. He was described as being reclusive, reportedly communicated with his parents by way of notes being slipped under the doors, and clearly that's no proper way for a kid to live, but not all parents are equipped to deal with certain aspects of their children, and so they just let that be the way that they talked. After all, Charles was getting straight D's, so how bad could things really be? He would go on to pursue higher education at a time when many Americans didn't even finish high school. But growing up without a social life would leave some serious marks on Charles's psyche, creating patterns of behavior that would persist throughout his life. His academic journey started at Texas A&M in 1942, but it wasn't the right fit for him. There he dropped out and then enrolled at the University of Houston, where he would eventually earn a degree in nuclear physics. And so that's the type of smarts this guy had long time before computers and calculators were there to help assist with such intense and difficult subject matter. Well, Charles could seemingly handle it all. Music. The early 1940s were a transformative time in American history, and Rogers would play his part like many young men of his generation. He answered the call to serve in World War II, but his role was far from ordinary with his technical background. And big brain Rogers didn't end up in the infantry on a regular Navy vessel. Instead, he became a pilot for the United States Navy, taking to the skies at a time when aerial warfare was revolutionizing combat. And Rogers wasn't just flying planes, he also served in the Office of Naval Intelligence posting that would later fuel countless theories about his life, and ultimately, his disappearance. The ONI, as it was known, was responsible for gathering and analyzing naval intelligence, protecting sensitive military information, and conducting various covert operations. What exactly Rogers did during his time there remains largely unknown, hidden behind a veil of military secrecy and conveniently lost records. What we do know, though, is that during this period, Rogers developed skills that went far beyond what you might expect from a typical naval officer. He became proficient in not just one or two, but 7 different music languages after earning his wings and developing a passion for aviation that would stay with him long after the war. He would later become known for making regular flights between Houston and Austin, a scale that would become particularly interesting to investigators years later, when they were trying to figure out how we might have escaped after the murders. But hold that thought, because we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. The thing to know for now is that this combination of technical knowledge, intelligence work, and aviation skills would shape Rogers's future in ways no one could have seen. Coming his time in the Office of Naval Intelligence would later lead some to speculate about possible connections to various government agencies and covert operations. Did his wartime service set him on a path that would eventually lead to tragedy, or did it simply give him the skills he needed to disappear? When the time came, by all accounts, Rogers was a brilliant geologist with an knack for finding gas and oil and gold. When the war was done, Rogers then landed a position that seemed pretty perfect for his skills and education. He became a seismologist for Shell Oil, a job he would hold on to for 9 years. By all accounts, he was excellent at his work, and colleagues described him as having an uncanny talent for finding oil, gas, and gold deposits he was exceptional at. This people that knew him and had worked with him on projects have said that he was a very hard worker and very bright and very good at what he did. But here's where things start to take a darker turn. In 1957, Rogers did something that didn't make sense to anybody out of the blue. He just up and quit his job at Shell. Oh, no explanation, no warning. He just walked away from a successful career. He was 36 years old at the time. And this would mark the beginning of a pattern of increasingly bizarre behavior. After this, and come the early 1960s, Rogers had become something of a ghost in his own life. He was living back with his parents, Fred and UA, in their Houston home, but living with might be stretching the definition. Despite sharing the same house, Charles rarely saw his parents, or anybody for that matter. He had developed such reclusive habits that he specifically left the home before 1 every day would only come back under the cover of night. To make this whole situation even more strange, nobody, not even his own parents, knew what Charles did during those long hours away from home. He would slip out, presumably to go into the city. But was he actually going to do